We have a very special episode of Security and Compliance Weekly to bring to you today. First, we're welcoming a new co-host to the show, Mr. John Snyder, Esquire. Esquire means that he's a lawyer. We're also interviewing two very special guests today who represent both the hacker security side of the industry as well as the business professional side. We are looking forward to discussing their perspectives on both communities, exploring what works and what doesn't in terms of this stuff we talk about between security and compliance. Also, how to change attitudes and win hearts and minds, especially on the security side, looking at the other side. All this and more as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to episode 34 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on July 7th, 2020. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my co-hosts, Mr. Josh Marpet and Scott Lyons, and we have a new co-host today, Mr. John Snyder, Esquire. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much for having us.
And this
John,
is going to be a good show today.
John, could you take just a few moments to introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely, Jeff. My name's John Snyder. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2002. I was a trial lawyer for close to 2 decades. As part of my practice, I became a lawyer for genius tech engineers. It became my practice, and one thing led to another, and in 2018, my partner Mac McCartney and I started Agnes Intelligence, which is a AI company, unsupervised machine learning, and so that's how I ended up in the tech world.
Well, great, thank you. We look forward to having you on the show, and I'm sure as time goes by, we'll learn a little bit more about your past and dare I say how AI and machine learning can help us on this adventure in security and compliance.
Should I get out my buzzword bingo card? Is that what I need for this one?
We might need 2 cards in the near future.
Oh, man.
A special announcement, personal announcement for me, if you will. You might notice I'm dressed somewhat formally today. Today, July 7th, happens to be my 30th wedding anniversary. So I would just like to say thank you to my wife for putting up with me for all these years. Not that she'll ever listen or watch the show, but it's the thought that counts. So cheers. Here's to you, my dear.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. A couple more announcements, and then we'll get into our interview. First, if you want to join the Security Weekly mailing list, and you can do that by, you can do that by going to securityweekly.com/subscribe, clicking the button to join the list. And also when you do that, you will receive your personal invitation to join our Discord server, which is celebrating my anniversary right now, I can see. So that's fun. Also, with all the recent changes to Black Hat and DEF CON, we at Security Weekly Productions realized we can keep doing what we do best, which is host virtual podcasts. So we're proud to announce Hacker Summer Camp 2020, which is a Security Weekly virtual live stream event, which will take place August 3rd through August 6th, 2020. To reserve your slot, you can visit securityweekly.com/summercamp2020. It's like being in Vegas, only not. So we'll do the best we can.
Only not the not part. It's
Except
very
not.
limited hallway con, but extremely unlimited, relaxed time. And the drinks are infinitely better priced.
Look at the bright side. You don't have to put up with the stench. Wait.
That
depends on your own personal. Never mind. We're not going hygiene questions there. And
I
again,
mean, do we have a 3-2-1 rule for working virtually?
Yes.
I would think
it's still the same.
3-2-1. I would think 3-2-1 applies whether you're in safe mode or not.
I mean, let's be honest. You still want at least 3 hours of sleep. You still want at least 2 meals a day. And oh, dear God, you want at least 1 shower a day.
One shower. Take that shower.
Enough of that. Nobody wants to hear us talk. Let's get on to our guest. For our first interview today, we are very pleased to welcome Kimber Dowsett to the show. Kimber is currently the Director of Security Engineering at a company called Truss. And she brings much experience and a fairly diverse background to the table. I'll let her tell more, obviously, but the name Apple comes up, also an organization called 18F, and even NASA. So, Kimber, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Really appreciate you being here. Hey, we start off our interviews with everybody with sort of the same question that we call the hot seat question. And it's really intended to be just your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. But just at the outset, we're curious as to what your take or what your view is on this thing that we call the security versus compliance continuum.
Continuum was a really good show.
It was actually.
Focus.
Sorry. Yeah. Now I have to binge watch that.
You're welcome.
So I live on this fence between security and compliance, and I have a healthy respect and appreciation of both sides of the coin. I think it's easy to say that compliance doesn't mean security. And I think it's easy to get on our security soapboxes and we're going to make this secure and F compliance and who cares? They don't know what they're talking about. But the reality is that at the heart of it, there are people on both sides, people who are just trying to do their jobs. And on the compliance side, those folks have been given a set of parameters to which they need to adhere, whether the security people like it or not. So I think a better way to look at it instead of like as the security team, this compliance team is just to like think of ourselves as one team with like different backgrounds, different skill sets, but to not be dismissive one of the other, which is usually security folks dismissing compliance folks or just the compliance process in general. Mm-hmm. I've been on the Fed side. I was on the Fed side concurrently for about 10 years. And the reality is that the rules surrounding compliance, particularly like 853, there are others, but that one was the bane of my existence for a long time. Those compliance rules came to be because there were ways that we found that you could adjust settings, set rules that in fact did help your system be more secure. And the list just kind of grew and grew and grew. In the federal space, one of the gotchas is that the tech grows a lot faster than the policy. So I think this is where like security folks can get hung up to say, oh, an example would be that's ridiculous that this policy for compliance is calling for a rotation of passwords every 90 days. When we've learned through being security practitioners that in fact that makes your environment less secure because folks are going to reuse a password and just stick a number at the end of it. Or they're going to start picking easier and easier passwords because you've got the thing set up that they can't reuse the password that they've had within the last 2 years, 3 years, whatever. So, we got on that soapbox for a while and eventually the policy changed and some of the recommendations from NIST relaxed that like, hey, you know what? Actually, this isn't good. So I kind of digress, but I think that you can't just be dismissive of compliance because it's compliance when like the reality is that a lot of those things that the compliance policy is asking for do help make your system safe. And like, what if you didn't fight about those things and you just implement them on the system? And then you fight about the other things, like proven things that we know to be less secure, right? So as a rule of thumb in the Fed space, I usually say you can fight about 1/4 of the controls. So like when you're going to get on that hill and die for it, be really sure that's the control you want to fight for, because you're not going to get a deviation on every control. Like that's just not the way the world works in the federal space or the private sector. Like private sector companies have their list of compliance policies as well. So I don't know. That was kind of a long rant tangent.
That's okay. But we like rants.
I don't know. Work together. Like stop complaining, stop fighting. Just like do the thing that's easy to like meet the controls. If they're easy, like just do them and then focus your time and energy on experimentation and research and making sure that you're building the most secure thing you can. Or like you're not that good. Like if you can't work in the confines of the compliance controls to still build a super secure system, like I don't know, maybe you've got some research and some humble pie to eat.
I got a couple questions just based on what you said. First, a comment. Even on our prep call last week, I was tempted to sort of go down the road of how do you view sort of government compliance world versus the non-government compliance world, which is almost like a topic unto itself. But what I'm curious about one thing you said. You said that within the government compliance context, you could fight about 1/4 of the controls. I'm curious as to whether that 1/4 of controls that you think are fall into that category, is it because they are obsolete or outdated and don't make sense, like the password expiration that you alluded to, or is it because they're just too hard to actually accomplish? It's just way over the top, or is it somewhere in between?
Good question. I don't think that it's because I think they're too hard to implement. So okay. If a security control we find is too hard to implement on a system, then it's up to the security practitioner to talk to the system owner or the ISSO or and this is going to be true of public and private sector, to find out exactly what problem they're trying to solve with that control, because maybe there's a different solution. This is where like user-centered security is super important, because a lot of times some of these system owners are just folks who got handed the job, right? You're the system owner now, and here's your list of controls. And they're not technical and they have no idea, or they just know, well, you're not supposed to be able to access through this one server or whatever the thing is, right? Okay, but why? And getting to the root of why sometimes will open up different possibilities. So I don't think that like you shy away from a control because it's too hard to implement, for one. Like you just need to figure out like what the problem is and solve it. There's also a piece of that's antiquated, right? Like I just said, with technology sort of outpacing policy. So we may
Wait,
find that
policy
there's a
is
control.
Policy is
Yeah.
slow? No. Compliance people are so up to date on everything, man. Come on.
Hey! What you're saying is
Totally.
heresy. Come on.
I mean, it's like saying that lawyers actually, keep up to date with technology.
Well,
But,
may I just make an observation on that point? As the representative of lawyers, though I have a healthy amount of contempt for my profession. But it seems to me, and I'll just kind of toss this out here as an idea, and if it resonates with anybody, feel free to follow up on it. But what we have in security and compliance is, in a sense, kind of the clash between the lawyers and the geeks. You think about how corporations and bureaucracies are structured. For the last 80 years, they've all been run by lawyers, right? Making policies. And now all of a sudden, everything's moving over to the cloud, and so many of the domains that used to be ruled by lawyers are now kind of de facto getting ruled by the geeks. And believe me, lawyers don't like it because they're lawyers like to be in control. So that's I think that's a dynamic that's happening within a lot of organizations. Is you got technology racing way ahead, and then you got the lawyers trying to get control of it and failing.
interesting.
I don't know. Take that for what it's worth. But
Kimber, what do you think about that? I got to ask your opinion on that.
I think we'd all get along better if you just go have
Shot
a cup
all
of
the
tea.
lawyers? No, I'm sorry.
No, go have a cup of tea with your lawyer friend, right? Like, I don't know. I'm very chill when it comes to interpersonal dynamics, and I really do try to live my life in this way where, like, if I'm very uncomfortable with a policy, a decision, a choice, whether it's security or not, like, I ask myself why a sane, rational person who I know to be a good person would have made this decision, and try to see it from their side. I don't know. Like, I could go off on a tangent about how we saw this with medical IoT devices and patching, and how FDA supported patching and wanted devices patched from that security researchers, if they found vulnerabilities, but it still had to go through this laborious 18-month process. And by the time you get through the process, there's a different patch, right? You couldn't just deploy a fix without a huge review on the Fed side. And I think that's changed. We know that's changed for the better now when it comes to security patching for IoT medical devices. So it's not that the folks on the compliance side or the lawyers don't want the same thing we all want, which is to build a secure system. Each of us just have a different set of constraints around doing that.
Well said.
And some of the constraints on the other side just means it takes a lot longer to get to the end goal.
Well said.
So
Well said.
I think it's really important here to break in and really talk about what the process is, right? When you're designing a system in any Fed space, right, you have a development proof of concept, then the proof of concept gets built out into what's known as an ATO, right, package, right? Or there's an ATO that needs to be placed on. ATO is authority to operate, right? So can you take a dev system and connect it up to a federal system and start manipulating data? That's where the compliance comes into play. Right, Kimber, am I wrong with this process? Right, dev to concept to. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually slightly different, and actually a little more messed up than that. So the authority to operate, the ATO, is the thing that you need, right? The rubber stamp to have the system in use in the federal space. The gotcha there is that to get the ATO in almost all agencies, you have to have the pen test, the security scans, all the things around an assessment happen in the production system. So you can't get an ATO on like a dev system. You can get a LATO, it's called a light ATO, on a prototype as long as the prototype's in production. So it's kind of messed up because you have to kind of have the thing like your best foot forward and flip it on and prod, and then the assessment can start on the SecOps side. Because those assessments are conducted by teams within the federal agencies themselves. So that's why you'll see private contract companies coming in to do assessments on systems in preparation of the ATO, because they want to fix everything they can before they submit their ATO package and push to prod so that the SecOps team can start their work.
So where in that process does the where in the process does the compliance piece come into play? Is that in the LATO, the ATO, right? And Josh just said POAMs. Where does the compliance come into that process?
So the compliance piece actually comes in pretty much from the beginning, right? In the beginning, like as you're prepping and road mapping out how to build the systems, one of the big pieces that you have to start on is the SSP, is the system security plan. The system security plan is going to lay out all the controls that are going to need to be implemented on the system, and the number of controls and which controls are based on whether before you even build the system, there has to be a determination made of whether it's a low, moderate, or high risk system. And then depending on that ranking, your system security plan is going to be laid out accordingly with those, the appropriate controls in place for that. So there'll be not really questions, but items, right? Controls in the SSP for, let's say, log retention for 90 days. So I'll just pick on log retention. So as you're building out the system, from day one that you're going to need to meet this control. I think the problem that we've seen is that when you're not baking in compliance from the beginning, the engineers are excited, security team's excited, everyone's excited, internal on the project security team, separate from the security team at the agency that's going to have to review it, right? But like your core team in the software development lifecycle, they're super excited. They want to crank it out, build the thing, and then come back to the SSP. And that's where, Josh, you get all those POAMs, right? Because they didn't do these 53 things on this list of 156 controls or whatever it is.
Right.
So
with a POAM, you can get your IATO.
Or your interim ATO. Right. So Kimber, let me
those are only good for a really short period of time. So they're not really ideal, and they don't solve the problem that you still have to go back and fix the things. But if we could start thinking about the SSP in the software development lifecycle to bake in compliance from the beginning, then the lift on the other end is not nearly as great.
Right. Now you work for Truss, right?
Yes.
Right. So you work for Truss in
San Francisco. Sorry.
Say what?
Shout out to Truss, San Francisco. Yeah.
So for Truss, what are you doing in the Fed space, and how are you seeing a shift in compliance in the Fed space from what you touch? Right now, I'm not asking you to go into anything confidential or anything like that, right? But just in general terms, what do you do for Truss, and what are you seeing as a shift in compliance?
Oh, that's a good question. Some of the stuff, I'm not going to talk about, but one of the big projects that we're proud of, and you can visit our website, truss.works, to read about it, is the military move project. So we call it our Mill Move project, and it's a project to help service members as if they get restationed, like it's to help streamline that process of moving, right? So everything from renting the truck to shipping the stuff to where they're going to be stationed, as you can imagine, there's a lot of service member data as part of that project that could potentially be exposed. So the ATO is very important to us, and we work alongside our Fed counterparts to meet the compliance needs of the project, but also requesting deviations when we know a security control, a particular control, to be antiquated, that there's a better way to secure that control, to secure that piece, to operate that thing. So that's where I get my 1 out of 4. Like, I'm willing to say, hey, actually, we could do this with, less than 20 lines of Python, and it's going to be more secure in this way, and write it up and request a deviation if I believe that with all of my heart. And then we open source it so that, the community at large can see how we solve the problem with this control. And we're transparent about that. And then the hope is, when it's time to open comment periods on the next round of NIST documents, that our folks are contributing to those comment periods, right? And saying, actually, here's how we solve this. Here's proof. Here are the tests we ran. Here it is live in production on a system. And then that's the way that you affect change. But it's not a quick process, right?
Right. And so I want to key in on something that you said. You have a lot of military members' data. What do you see is a really good shift towards data privacy within the government, right? We have GDPR and CCPA, which are really ruling the roost, right? GDPR for Europe and CCPA for California, plus all the other 20 some odd states that are coming out with privacy legislation. What is the government doing to secure that data? Like, how are they saying, well, you need to be under CIPPA, right? Or some other privacy control?
So I'm going to back up and say, just to clarify, that Truss is not holding any service member data. So let me just clarify that real quick.
The disclaimer up front.
we build software infrastructure systems and applications, but the agencies that we build for, they own their infrastructure, they own their data, and we only have access to data, like data calls, like the APIs, but we don't house the data. So let me just make that clear. And I think that is a step toward doing a better job securing service member, federal employee, U.S. citizen data, right? Like, we need to get this data out of the hands of contractors and have it held and protected by the agency that is collecting that data.
Wait, responsible for their own data? What's wrong with you? Come on.
I mean, it's, I don't know, you hand out enough business cards and the wrong person's going to get your contact information. Is just sort of how I feel. But what if you only gave out business cards on a need to know basis, which is a terrible metaphor or analogy.
Yeah.
So, again, tech outpaces the policy. And also, we live in a world right now where data is our most valuable commodity. So it's foolish to think that data isn't as high target of, as anything else out there in the world right now. You get your hands on the right data And that's going to be worth more than getting your hands into the bank vault, right?
And I've got to say this, wait. In a world where data is as valuable as gold, Ms. Bat is here. And why don't we give it to Jeff to wrap?
Man.
No,
I had to do it. It was perfect. Come on.
Man.
But you feel me, right? Like,
no, you're right. But I had to do the in the world.
Data if you keep giving it away, right? Or if you keep selling it, or if you keep trusting the wrong contractors to handle it correctly. So, of course, we all get popped.
So, Kimber, one or two quick questions, and then we unfortunately need to take a break. I'm curious from your experience and viewpoint, and what things you said throughout this episode. If not for compliance standards such as you mentioned, NIST 853, what do people, in your opinion, how do they know if and how to secure a system? What are their resources for securing a system, if not for a particular compliance regulatory standard?
That's a really good question. I think that
I threw the stumper that she warned me not to do.
No. I think that, I hate to point to Dr. Google, right? But I think that a lot of companies have done a really good job sharing out that information. So it used to be that that everything was held really close to the chest by security companies that were just up and out there, right? But now we see different companies, even like Microsoft or IBM or, Apple, sharing tidbits about how to stay secure, open sourcing some tools, which is nice. But we also see private companies like Trusted Sec. You can go to their website and they've got, documentation there for things that you can do. And I think that's because if you're starting from scratch, there's some staples, some foundational things that you can do to secure your system, right? Like closing certain ports or setting certain methods of authentication, or, where are you going to build it? What are the constraints of the system? Do you need DNSSEC, or, can you stand it up in AWS? And if you do, hey, guess what? Amazon has got a whole list of things that you can do to make your system more secure, that don't cost anything extra. It's just a matter of enabling things in the console. So I guess my answer is it depends, right? Mm-hmm. Are you building on Iron? Are you going to stand up an instance? Are you trying to stand up an infrastructure? Are you trying to go cloud? Does your buddy have a server farm in his basement and you want to run some Xe hosts or whatever? But is it, I don't know, is it a cop-out answer to just say Google it? Because you couldn't say that 5 years ago, and now you can, right? Now there's an understanding that it's like an architect could share the plans to build a house online, but unless you have skilled people to build that home, the information doesn't do a whole lot for you. And so I think companies like Truss, we're more than willing to share out our principles, our Terraform modules, knowing that you still may need to hire skilled folks to implement, right? And that could be the same with security controls. You can find a bare bones list of things you should do to your system. But if you're running enterprise level systems that house precious data, then you're going to need to hire a company to help you implement those controls.
So what I'm hearing you saying is there's a certain amount of personal accountability, either personal or corporate, but you should take responsibility for finding out how to secure your system, and don't simply rely on a compliance list to tell you what are the things to do. You need to do your homework and take some ownership, as it were. That's what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
If if you're building a certain type of system that some compliance guidelines are already in place, or out there or published, like great, start there, but don't stop there.
Great. Any parting thoughts to us on your perspective of how the security and compliance folks can get along better? You mentioned a few things at the outset, but any parting thoughts before we take a break?
Yeah, I think a lot of the conflicts in tech across teams that we see come from these vertical silos. So if there's a way, I'm not even kidding when I say like get a tea, do a virtual tea with the counterpart on the other side to try to understand a little bit more about the problems they're trying to solve. So if the security that you need to build out, enable, construct is solving a problem that doesn't really fall into the compliance folks' wheelhouse, or the compliant folks are trying to solve a problem like, I need you to meet this control, and you don't really understand like why that's helpful. Like we can all say, oh, that's stupid, that doesn't make you more secure. Like really getting those user stories to find out what problem you're both trying to solve, and then meeting in the middle. I don't know. I'm very anti being dismissive of another team. Full stop. So.
Great. Appreciate your thoughts on that, Kimber. And thank you so much for joining us today. This has been Kimber Dowsett from Truss.works. You can check out her website and see some of the things she's been working on. With that, we're going to take a break. When we come back, our second segment is going to be an interview with somebody from the other side. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.